You are looking at a sleeping puppy. When she found out that I was pulling out the camcorder, she fell asleep because she didn't want her face to be seen. I don't blame her. Let's get to the other side, shall we? So this is the Yobo FC3 Plus. This is a clone console that I've had for a couple years now. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, this is a 3-in-1 video game clone system that allows you to play 3 different formats of games. It's kind of obvious which formats they play, but I'll play dumb for a couple minutes if you don't mind. Let's just go over the system. You got your 2 controller ports. One of the controllers are plugged in. You got your power, your reset, your toggle switch. You got your Super Nintendo slot. You got your Sega Genesis slot. You got your Nintendo slot. You can go here. I want to attempt. There, you got your AV cables. You got a weird switch. I don't know what it does. It says OJ. You know, I have alternate footage that shows you what the switch is. And then you got your power, which is not plugged in at the moment. Okay. Yes, I am doing this sitting down. It's the best way for me to do the angle shots. Anyways, this is going to be awkward because I got to get all this stuff from... Bear with me for a minute, folks. Alright, so as I sort of mentioned to you, this is a clone system that's capable of playing 3 different systems, such as Nintendo, NES, like Castlevania, and it takes a bit of effort to fit the NES side in there. That's a common trait with most clone systems, but after a while it gets easier. You can play Sega Genesis or Sega Mega Drive video games such as Castlevania Bloodlines. It goes in like that. And you can also play Super Nintendo games like, what a surprise, Super Castlevania 4. And that's what the whole setup looks like. You'll note that the poor Genesis cartridge is sandwiched between the much taller NES and moderately taller Super NES games. So if you just look at it from this angle, it looks like there's only 2 game consoles, unless you have like a Sonic & Knuckles or a Game Genie adapter for Genesis, and you put that in the middle, and then, you know, the cartridge is a little higher and you can see it. But yeah, you know, they definitely, personally, they should have done the Genesis here, so it would have looked a lot cooler, but I digress. Anyways, I'm going to show you some test footage, not necessarily from these games, but I'm going to show you some test footage of the FC3 in action. Anyways, it's a pretty decent console. Of course, you know, like any clone console, there's compatibility issues. There's certain games that won't work with it, such as Castlevania 3 being the most infamous culprit about these clone systems. Not a lot of clone systems can play them. The only one I think of off the top of my head are the Retro Duo and the FC Mobile 2, I believe. You know, those are examples of 2 clone systems that can play Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. And there's other examples too, you have to go online, but anyways, compatibility issues aside, there's another minor gripe as far as the NES side goes, but again, we'll look at the footage before I dwell on it here. I just wanted to look at the controllers here. The FC3 Plus comes with 2 controllers and a light gun, which I no longer have because the light gun doesn't work on this TV, and even then, when I had the old CRT TV here, it didn't work with that either. But I don't blame it on the gun, because I had a couple of real zappers and they wouldn't work on that TV either. So I generally don't keep the light guns. I just store it somewhere, or I just throw it away or something. I don't know. I don't remember what I do with the light guns. I give it a charity, I guess. Anyways, these are the controllers that the FC3 comes with. Comes with 2 of them. And the little D-pad that's common with some of the older If you've seen the older FC, the little boxed clone NES clone systems, they have like a controller that's like sort of like where the D-pad is sort of like raised up there. It's kind of a nice, comfortable feeling. You also have your X, Y, Z, A, B, C, your select, start, and your trigger buttons, which is good for Super Nintendo if you desire. So it's a nice rounded controller. The only issue with this controller is if you don't like these controllers, you are stuck with these controllers. I'll tell you why. I'll give you a good look at these. Try to give you a good look at these. You'll see that the connector ports are sort of slanted here. And I'll pull this out of the plug. Yeah, you see the little slant on the 9-pin. It's a proprietary connection, so I'm able to fit these controllers easily. Let's say I want to plug in this Atari 2600 joystick into the machine. No reason why you'd really want to. I'm just using this as an example because it's the only plug. Anyways, this is a 9-pin connector. Standard 9-pin connector for time. It's been on the Atari 2600, 7800, a variety of computer systems of the time, ColecoVision. Most importantly, in the one console relevant to this, the Sega Genesis or Sega Mega Drive. I'll plug that in there. Oh noes, I cannot plug in there. It does not fit. What this means is that if anything happens to these controllers, good luck trying to find replacements, because I went online and I couldn't find any place that was selling replacement controllers. They probably would a couple of years ago. Pretty sure this thing's out of production, no longer in production. So it's even more of a once you lose both controllers or something happens to them, you break them. This thing becomes a gigantic paperweight. Of course, the only way to get around this would be to take a couple of old controllers that you have on a table and mod them so that they use this plug instead of their usual plug, but why would you want to? And even then, there's already a better alternative called the Retron 3, which allows you to use the actual controllers. Not this, though. Would have been cool, though, if you could play a Super Nintendo game with a 2600 joystick, the all-in-one, all that. That would have been cool. Would have been freaky, though. Anyways. So I've rambled long enough about the console's exterior and its controllers and stuff. Let's look at some gameplay feature. Let's look at, what it's capable of.
Anytime I want to test an NES clone system's capability, I pull out Super Mario Bros. It's probably the best litmus test of a clone system's capabilities in my opinion, and tells you everything you need to know about how well it performs. Right off the bat, the colors are off because of the purple sky, the text is sharper and harsher than normal, and the sound emulation's pretty off. Some games will look better than others, like Mario 3 for example, and the sound inaccuracy won't be notable at times for certain games, but I feel it's something that should be brought up, especially in comparing, in testing out the capabilities of the NES side of the FC3 Plus. One more thing to note are the button mappings. A button is your A button, B button is your B button, and C button is both A and B pressed at the same time. It's an adjustment you have to get used to primarily with side-scrollers, but it doesn't necessarily cripple the gameplay. You can even mimic NES gamepad workability by using C and B exclusively instead of A and B, although you have to be wary of games that have a secondary action whenever both the A and B buttons are pressed at the same time. Overall, the NES side is alright, but it's not perfect. The main issue I have with the Super Nintendo side of the FC3 Plus is primarily the button mapping. It's mapped in such a way that I sometimes have an unbearable time playing certain games like Super Mario World. So rather than use that as a test, I decided to go with one of my all-time favorite Super Nintendo games, Super Castlevania 4. Ideally, any game that allows you to reconfigure your button mapping is most ideal for the FC3 Plus. Redundant much. Fighting games in particular, like Street Fighter Take Your Pick, works wonders here. Otherwise, it all depends on your ability to adapt to the button mapping of the FC3 Plus's controller. In my case, however, I'll probably stick with my good old trusty FC Twin for most Super Nintendo games. But aside from that, the SNES side looks good, sounds good, can't really complain in terms of the presentation. The button mapping is another story, but if you could get used to it, it shouldn't be an issue. As far as the Genesis side goes, all the buttons work as they should. A is A, B is B, C and C, so on and so forth. Makes sense, right? It's modeled after a 6-button Sega Genesis controller, so you'd have to be a complete idiot to fuck up button mapping on a clone Genesis controller. As far as presentation goes, it looks alright. Colors might be brighter in some cases, and the sound is somewhat louder than it normally should be. I think the bass is a little high, but other than that, it's pretty standard fare. Nothing to really complain about.
And that was the Yobo FC3 Plus. And you saw some game footage. It also sort of brought up the, as far as the NES side, it's playable for the most part. As far as the Genesis side, obviously, it's a great Genesis clone. And the buttons work fine. As a Super Nintendo clone, especially considering you cannot swap, the joypads. I mean, certainly the key mapping on this is sort of ridiculous. Certain games like Mario was probably not ideal for this console, but if you have like a fighter like Street Fighter 2, as I demonstrated, where you could fully customize your buttons here, then you have like a good, and then they're pretty much a suitable game. But it's like I said, that's the only drawback with these controllers, is that they're the only ones you could use. You can't use like a Super Nintendo or Genesis or whatever the case may be, unless you do some modding. But it's not really all that worth it. I was happy with the FC3 Plus when I bought it. Certainly it was a good alternative to, trying to pull up Genesis. Like, I could play Super Nintendo, I could play Genesis later. That sort of thing. But again, with the Super Nintendo side at least, controlling is problematic because of the mapping, the weird button mapping. So, if you play like a game like that has like customizable controls, it shouldn't be a big issue. But if you want to play like a Mario game or something like that, where the controls are all whacked out, that's going to be problematic. But can't say it isn't possible. If you could get around that, then the FC3 Plus is a good console. Although probably not one I would recommend these days, especially since there's a much better alternative in the Retron 3. Although some would argue that, why would you go for this when you go for the original consoles? One is convenience. One is, the save space. There's a variety of reasons you could get a clone console rather than the original consoles, despite the fact that Genesi are kind of easy to come across. They tend to be cheap. Super Nintendos no less. Although if you want to pick up a Super Nintendo that's turning yellow, be my guest. But I'm not here to judge. Anyways, the FC3 Plus, the decent console when I got it, but once I got the Retron 3, I just gave up on it and sort of just collecting dust, as you could tell here. As a matter of fact, I just popped this out for the purposes of this video. So it's probably going to go back in the drawer, and I'm just going to plug in my FC Twin, which is in this drawer, waiting in the mists. Yeah, there it is. So, that was my video overview of the Yobo FC3 Plus, and I thank you for watching, and I thank you for staying asleep and not interrupting me. Good girl.